A recently published IMF working paper said that, quote, the effect of the food subsidy adjustments on poverty is striking. Real inequality, as measured by the Gini coefficient, has declined to near its lowest levels reached in the last 40 years. Unquote. The IMF has clarified that the views expressed in the paper are of the authors Surjit Bhalla, Executive Director for India at the fund, Arvind Virmani, former Chief Economic Advisor, and Karan Bhasin, a policy researcher, and do not necessarily represent those of the multilateral agency. The report, in a way, hailed the implementation of the free ration scheme while pointing out that it was marred by problems earlier. It said that just 7 years after the expansion of the PDS policy, the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi had described the PDS system in 1985 as corrupt and or inefficient, and concluded that only 15% of the funds meant for redistribution to the poor reached the poor. India announced an expansion of this already large food subsidy program in 2013. The report pointed out that one of the differences with the past policy was a decline in coverage. Instead of near universal access, it was now limited to support for the bottom half of the urban and bottom 2/3 of the rural population. The food support was increased during the pandemic. The food grain ration was doubled for each recipient from 5 kgs of wheat or rice per month to 10 kgs in 2020. The report claimed that consumption inequality during the COVID-affected 2020-21 in India fell to near the lowest level in the last 40 years, primarily because of the free food supply to 800 million people among other factors. However, the consumption inequality rose a bit during 2020-21 compared to the previous year if food transfers are not taken into account, showed the paper titled Pandemic, Poverty and Inequality Evidence from India. Besides, inequality in wages of casual and daily wage workers declined dramatically during 2019-20 compared to 2011-2012, but it rose from the previous year of 2018-19. The inequality is measured by Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient of 100 means perfect inequality and 0 means perfect equality. The Gini coefficient in consumption declined to 29.4 during 2020-21, which is very close to its lowest level of 28.4 in 1993-94, said the paper. The score on this parameter stood at 30.4 in 2019-20, which was also lower than 30.6 in the previous year. However, if subsidized food transfers are not taken into account, the coefficient rose a bit to 31.5 during 2020-21 from 31.4 in 2019-20. These numbers are calculated on the basis of real private final consumption expenditure growth beyond 2011-12. The working paper used the Consumption Expenditure Survey by the National Statistical Office for its calculations. But the last such survey came in 2011-12. The latest survey of 2017-18 was junked by the government. The paper used another methodology on the basis of real state gross domestic product or SGDP growth to gauge the numbers beyond 2011-2012. On the basis of this methodology, the Gini declined to 30.3 during 2020-21 from 31.3 in 2019-20 if food transfers are taken into account. The inequality was the lowest since 2011-12. However, if food transfers are not taken into account, the coefficient remained constant at 32.4 during 2020-21 and 2019-20. This way, the inequality was the highest in the past 12 years during 2019-20 and stayed there during 2020-21. The paper also shows that wage inequality for the casual and salaried workers showed a larger decline in Gini from 49.89 in 2011-12 to 43.04 in 2019-20. Quote, this is very large improvement suggestive of both inclusive growth and healthy income growth amongst a larger fraction of the poor, casual daily wage workers, said the paper. However, wage inequality rose compared to the Gini coefficient of 42 in 2018-19. It seems surprising that consumption inequality was almost the lowest in 2020-21 in 40 years when everyone is talking about a K-shaped recovery. Jobs were below 2019 levels and wage growth below inflation. Responding to this query, Virmani clarified that the study measures the Gini coefficient of consumption expenditures, not of income or of wealth.
The first part is that people mix up wealth effects on income, consumption, everything is mixed up. Okay. For example, when the lockdown occurred, there was no income for majority of people, whether they are rich or poor, but their wealth is being drawn down. So during the first year of the pandemic, everybody is drawing down wealth but obviously the poor have less wealth and they'll run into the constraint. The second part is what is exactly we have done. What we have done is measured the distribution of consumption expenditure, not of wealth, not of income. So what is the economic difference? So the difference is that people generally maintain their consumption to the extent that they can by borrowing or lending or using their savings. So that's the first point, to be 100% clear. The second point is, okay, once that is clear, what is it that our results show? So what our results show is that if you look at the normal, the usual way of measuring income distribution, the Gini coefficient, there was no change between 1919 and 20. Okay, there's no change. What the change is coming from is that if you look at the Gini coefficient, the real Gini coefficient adjusted for food subsidies throughout the whole period, then there is a sharp fall in 2020. So you have to be very careful in understanding what we are saying. So all this effect, so we have it without food subsidies, there is no change between 1990, 20 and 2021. When you take the whole thing with food subsidies, there is a sharp change of 1%, which basically takes it below the earlier periods. Now, so that is the thing. So you have to be, just to give you some numbers, without adjustment, the Gini quotient in 2019 was worse than in 2011 or 2004, which we know from the surveys. However, when you account for the subsidies, then the 2019 coefficient was almost the same as 2004, but was worse than in 2011. So, but when you add the free food which was given, then the Gini coefficient improves.
There is also evidence from periodic labor force quarterly urban surveys that regular wage employees suffered more job losses than casual labor, and self-employed and secondary workers suffered more job losses than tertiary, while agriculture gained jobs. But Virmani said that these two facts do not suggest a worsening income distribution during 2020. Meanwhile, Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has welcomed the report. She said that, quote, "The working paper notes that social safety net given to the poor by the way of expansion of country's food subsidy program absorbed a major chunk of the pandemic shock," unquote.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.